Hi, everybody. Good day, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining our discussion today about a plant that is very well known, but at the same time, not that well known. We're going to talk today about cultivating a sacred relationship with cannabis or ganja. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Courtney. I am a lover of plants. I am the CEO of a little company called Plant Medicine People, and we're all about cultivating conscious relationships with all of the plant kingdom, but specifically the entheogens. And I have with me today one of my favorite people in the world. His name is Dr. Richard Doyle, but you can call him Mobius, or I call him Mo. Mo is, to me, my coach and dear friend. He's also the publisher of a little operation called Metanoia, which is where my Plant Medicine Mystery School book and is published among other amazing works. He's the author of many, many books himself, including Darwin's Pharmacy, which is one of my favorites. And he happens to be a longtime lover of Lady Ganja. I don't want to call him an expert because none of us can claim to be experts on plants. But Mo, let's start out. Would you tell us a little bit about your journey with Lady Ganja and who you are as a being in relation to these plants?
Yes. Thank you. First of all, it's really awesome. Thank you for showing up. I'm really excited about this opportunity. You know, I teach in a university context most of the time, and there's just something fabulously intentional and ecstatic about this. You know, everybody's showing up on purpose, and that's beautiful. So I really thank you for that from bottom of my heart. Cannabis, to me, like the reason I wanted to do this talk with you today, Kat, and is that cannabis to me is completely or almost entirely underexplored plant in the contemporary sphere, which sounds like a paradox, right? A contradiction, because it's like, but it's everywhere now. It's practically required by our HR department soon, right? But it's been proliferated in this way, of course, which strips us of our obligation and our agency to really cultivate, in that gardener sense of the term, our relationship to the plant. And that when we cultivate and we humbly come to the plant, then it has so much to teach us and so many ways of healing us that we just, as it were, blaze right on by if we don't pause to act with her with awareness. Now I could say, aha, when I was 12 years old in 1975, and I smoked my first joint with my brother when I was, just about to listen to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon on the 8-track at my grandparents' house on the headphones, right? That I understood that, and that I saw immediately, because I had been born with this special power to manifest the plant intelligence. Not at all, right? Not at all. And what ensued for the next 46 years was a very long apprenticeship with this plant, which took me at least until I was in my 40s. So, over 28 years of getting to know Lady Ganja, that I felt like I had begun to learn how to interact with this plant, right?
At a preschool.
Yes. And so that insight, so go ahead.
No, beautiful. I mean,
yeah.
it's a beautiful foundation to start our discussion in this space of humility. Yes. That we are in long-term relationships with these beings. But as ayahuasca showed me once, I've got one tiny pixel of understanding of who they are. as consciousnesses, as rays of the mystery. And it's a nice shiny pixel, but that's all I got, so
Sure.
yeah.
That's what we do, right? We cram it into a pixel. And so that's why I start there with the humility, and the humility is the beginning and the end of the teaching, really. Like, to answer the question of the podcast, how to cultivate a sacred relationship with ganja. Well, we'll get to that word sacred, but the first word is really humility. Come humbly, check your expectations, clean up the house, take out the trash, right? Moses was told to take off his shoes before, going up the mountain, right? Set it outside of the ordinary time, the ordinary doings of everything. Now, it doesn't mean that it has to take, as you well know, Kat, all those 28 years to realize that you can have an aware relationship with the plant as a sentient being, right? But it may help to just like focus, because like probably a lot of us will kind of involuntarily cringe or flee from language that ascribes kind of more or less kind of personified consciousness to a plant, right? We're just like, it does not compute, right? Like like we can probably quite easily ascribe consciousness to a dog, a cat that we get to know, and so forth. Or when we hear a blue whale song, or, if we're true adepts, like if we get down with a rock in the right way, we might be able to key into its case. But plants have been represented as nothing but carriers of their compounds, right? I mean, right, and none more so, right, than cannabis, which only as we now are doing this kind of intensive science, long prohibited science on the plant, a science that was begun in the West actually by Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, the evolutionist, who named cannabis indica. So it's not like, get a late pass. First article on, scientific article in the West on medical use of cannabis is, I believe, 1847, by O'Shaughnessy, an Irish physician in India. It's really remarkable if you read it. It's got a lot more clarity than almost anything written since, because it's coming to it without this bias. So cultivating a sacred relationship to ganja, to any plant, but cultivating a sacred relationship to ganja is particularly difficult because we have to kind of squeegee clean that windshield that's covered in the propaganda that we've all been kind of splattered with continuously since like we were, available for that. No matter where we came to it, we've been told what it is, and we think we know what it is before we approach it. And that gets in the way of our experiencing what it is. So, I would say that it took me, so then the next kind of threshold, since you asked about my lifelong relationship, and there was a period of 7 years of hiatus after I was healed by Mamawaska, and I learned, one of the first things I learned after drinking ayahuasca the first few times was that A, cannabis was a teacher plant, and B, I should freaking have some more respect for cannabis. And that C, Mama was a teacher plant, and that she was ready to heal me of my lifelong severe asthma and whole body eczema, and she freaking did it, So there was a 7-year hiatus there because I was meditating one day, and we'll talk more about meditation, but I was meditating one day, and I literally just got the small, still voice, and it said, "You're done with this." By this, it meant even nipping away a little bit, which was my habit, microdosing on cannabis. And that was a very, very interesting passage and journey, as was reconnecting with her. There was a period when I understood that Mama Waska told me that I'd had an addictive relationship with cannabis. And she said, from now on, your cannabis habit is gone. And I thought, surely she must be joking, and I was going to have to live up to that somehow. But I learned that she was correct, because then every time I used cannabis after that, including the next day, as she told me, it was shamanic. In other words, I couldn't just get high, right? I would inadvertently turn into a bird, right? You know, if I didn't mindfully encounter the cannabis. So that meant if you don't want to like suddenly transform into a bird, you know, you're very careful about when you interact. And that really, that 7-year journey of coming back to her in it, when to really deal with the addiction, I did something that I learned from my meditating and self-inquiry tradition, which was I went and bought a pipe, a nice one, a nice glass pipe. And I had some leftover ganja from years before, because I wasn't going to throw it away. It was sacred. And I put it in the glass bowl and I put it there. And then I asked myself, who's going to smoke that? And I waited. I would visit it. I would ask myself that question. And I think it was 2 years that I did that, right? Until we went medical in Pennsylvania, and I got my medical card, and I was like, well, might as well do that. I've got this neuropathy in my neck from getting shingles a gazillion times. And I'll bet you Lady Ganja will help me with that. So I went and got my medical card, and then slowly approached her. And I'm still on a kind of microdose relationship with her. And that is the product of that kind of 7-year relation. So that's my path. That's not everybody's path, but I do think that it is very likely that everybody's path is likely to begin with that humility. And then out of that humility, cultivating this capacity, experimenting with the idea of this is an extraordinary natural intelligence that you can learn how to learn from, right? That is not really a person in the same way that you're a person, because newsflash, according to Buddhism anyway, you're not really a person the way you think you're a person anyway. Right.
Part of what they teach us. Yes.
Yes.
Our
which
limited
is part of what the plants teach us.
perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
Get out.
Yeah.
And so, but I want to make clear that the whole scientific model of cannabis, which I have enormous respect for and have kept tabs on for many, many years, and in fact, attempted to announce and declare the opening of the first cannabis genome project in 1994, when I announced the open source sequencing of the cannabis genome and invited people to participate, and some did. I wasn't the only person to do that, but I did that in 94. And, but it takes its own vocabularies and approach so for granted that it often blinds us to the fact that, like, hey, talking about this plant as if it were made of these little building blocks of cannabinoids is no more realistic, right, than talking about this plant as a sentient natural intelligence. Both of them are models of how we interact with the plant. We're able to interact with the plant and isolate different compounds and purify them and identify them and so forth. We're also able to interact with the plant by ingesting it, smoking it, vaping it, using it as an anointing oil, which is a remarkable experience. And we interact with it there. And when we interact with it there, we find that by hook or crook, we may just find ourselves at the point of recognizing that we are usefully in dialogue with a natural intelligence. The fact that we don't have a paradigm for that really doesn't need to stop it, right? There's a lot of contemporary Western medicine that nobody knows why or how it works, but it does. And so we need not become too worried by the mystery of, like, is it really a sentient being or is it not? But instead come out of humility, which comes from that place where we know that we ourselves are kind of not the people we think we are.
So what I hear you saying is a foundation that we perpetuate in relationship with these beings is to listen first and foremost, which is a really interesting, I think, Western block that a lot of us have in relationship with the plants is that, you know, I see this in the ayahuasca space, we're treating them as liquid psychologists,
Yes.
or like Santa Claus of like, please give me all of these things, which they have a capacity to help us co-create, right? But we're missing, a lot of us, at least it took me a while to cultivate this piece of recognizing a relationship is twofold. And it
Yes.
involves not only asking, but listening and inquiring about who they are. Like Ganja. So I want to give a quick context for my relationship with her because it's important to have full disclosure. I haven't had a long-term deep relationship with her because from the very first time I imbibed with her, it was psychedelic. I don't know what it's like to work with her in a giggly sort of social space. I've always been held accountable by her that it's go big or go home, and that you better treat it as a ceremony because I'm going to turn into that bird that you speak of very easily. And so she schooled me out of the gate of my relationship with these beings is based on them being sacraments, and that I don't get to just have fun times on drugs, which is awesome. I used to think that was a handicap. And then of course, now I understand that was a gift she gave me from day one. So I don't know her in the same way that a lot of the people who have joined us do, simply because it's been few and far between my ceremonies with her because I am going into outer space and I don't have a say in it. So, but to listen, that piece of listening that you brought in, that we're there to, it's like any other relationship, you know, like what we cultivate with people in our lives. If it's just one-sided, it's not going to be very intimate or long lasting. So, but tell me about, let's talk a bit about, I'm so fascinated by the spirit of Ganja and how patient she is with her devotees when we work with her unconsciously, when we go again and again to escape. Because she's a bit unique in the space of entheogens because she's physically addictive, right? And psychologically, but they all can be that. But she holds us accountable, and at the same time, she loves us enough to mirror our shadow, our lack of reverence, of listening, of having conscious intention until we do. But can you talk a little bit about how she works with human consciousness, you know, in your experience?
Sure. First of all, she works best, as you note in your book, with all of the entheogens. She works best once we come to her with some awareness and the experience of a deep intention, right? And again, that was a long time coming to me, but one of the ways I came to learn that from her was that what she does that you described so well in terms of mirroring that shadow back to us, like that she mirrors back the lack of reverence, for example. One of the reasons I think she's such an amazing healing plant in specific for the body mind is that she lights up a problem that you've been occluding, right? That like maybe you're not even aware that your big toe is crossing over the other toe because you have no awareness, like many people, in your freaking feet, right? You don't pay attention to your feet. You do yoga with the rest of your body and you're like, oh, my feet, they just carry me around, right? But if you get reverent as you're describing and listen and get with the ganja, you're like, my foot. I have to freaking pay attention to my foot. Where has my foot been for the past 20 years? Right? So that's why she lets you just get away with whatever blind spot it is, because eventually you're going to stumble on it, right? She's not in a hurry for you, because if we come to that stumbling ourselves, then you get that part of agency out of your own soul, if I can put it that way, where like, ain't nobody gonna do this but me. I got to figure this foot thing out, right? Whereas if she says, let me tell you, okay, look, your foot, you got to start walking differently. Like if she just told you that, you're like, oh, okay. You know, Miss Lady Ganja know it all. Okay, I'll do that. I'll meditate more too. It's like, right? But if you discover it from the inside, this is why she's actually quite a difficult teacher, because she'll only take you to the level that you're capable of reaching. So there's lots of knots to be untied and feelings to have. Like a lot of people, you know, they quote experiment with cannabis in college or whatnot. They probably have really good sex on it, is my my feeling. But then after they're like, oh, I can't, it makes me paranoid, or I can't do this, or I can't do that. And it's because of that accrued baggage that by that point, you know, you're 23, you're 25, you're learning, the whole world is teaching you, yeah, don't really feel that, right? Don't feel that. We don't want to hear that. Like, leave that at home, right? You know, just bottle that up and put that away somewhere, right? That feeling that you have to feel. And then you smoke a little ganja. It's like when people rush out of a meditation session, a similar thing can happen. You're like, ah, you're making me sit with my shit. And it's just like, well, I have news for you. You're going to have to sit with your shit no matter what. And Lady Ganja is just saying, hey, by the way, you know, got your best interests at my heart, because, you know, we're co-evolutionary beings here. We're on a symbiotic tip. We're on the symbiotic starship together. Okay, so you do better, I do better.
But then how do you address the fact that she supports some people in not feeling the shit? Right? This is the issue I had with her, witnessing the stoner sitting on the couch, not feeling anything. My ex-husband, who is an addict, who didn't feel anything. So how is that part of her teaching?
Great one there. You know, the unfair and simple answer I'll give there is that's just her storing it up. Okay, like for when
Build up.
for when the big old cosmic smackdown comes, right? And if you're unlucky, you're that couch locked stoner, and then you quit, you don't smoke anymore, and you never learn, right? You never actually learn.
That's where we blame the plants,
yes,
for bringing us into a bad state of consciousness, when in fact it's us. We get to feel it. So that's why people with her go through periods of like, oh, I feel so fearless and happy, and then suddenly the paranoia comes in. It's not her fault. It's something that's been building within us, and it's an invitation to work with it, not to blame the plant and shut down and like be distracted by everything else in the world. Yeah.
And this is the perfect cue of why for every bong, there needs to be a meditation cushion, okay? Because if, in my humble experience, you don't do physical practice that opens you to the dialogue with this plant, if you don't do spiritual practice in dialogue with this plant, and if you don't do meditative practice to be in dialogue with this plant, you're just going to get stuck on an infinite loop of rehearsal at the same old, right? And you'll probably switch strain or something like that. You'll go indica instead of sativa, or you'll find some new terpene profile, or one of the other, helpful guides to the nature of these plants as they're available to us. But, you won't really experience the full Monty of its healing effect as a medicine, right?
Well, because in ayahuasca's words, when we just turn to the plant repeatedly without a beautiful practice, she calls that doing your homework on the teacher's desk. Like, instead of integrating the reflections that ganja, aya, whomever is giving us into our daily lives, we, and ganja in particular, can become this habitual all day, every day. And she becomes a distraction then. She supports us in that, not to support the actual distraction, but to hold us accountable for having our own awakening around it. I know from my own experience with her, when I finally came to her intentionally, oh my goodness, she opened the keys to the kingdom of like, there we go. Thank you for being in relationship with me. And I got you, whatever you're looking for, you know? And I find it fascinating that as an example, she, if we're using her unintentionally, can be blamed for shutting down short-term memory, relationship with dreams, all of these things that we wouldn't say are beneficial. But if you turn to her and say, can you help me with these things, rather than blame her of like, what's happening with my memory? What's happening with my access to my subconscious and dream space? She can help co-create a reminder of that. So I actually see her tied to the goddess of memory, because she has both sides, the shadow and the light, depending on what we're bringing. It's really quite magical, but we're so quick to blame the plant, that it's their fault we're experiencing those things, instead of bringing it back home in accountability.
Right. I mean, that's just such a beautiful teaching, Kat, because what you're pointing to there is, when we come with the humility to the medicine, there's no subject, meaning no object. There's no subject, meaning there's no I, show me some healing, give me some healing. No, there is an entering into a relationship, like, as you said, listening, kind of beyond words, like, I'm here for whatever you have to teach me, right? And when you open with that, I'm here for whatever you have to teach me, and you get comfortable with that, then you really can say, like, help me find God. And that's the strange thing. Again, the other paradigm, besides the paradigm that is really just a bunch of compounds that the plant has learned how to make in order to, attract insects and so forth, which also has its own layer of truth to it. But besides thinking about it as a compound, we also have, I don't know how to put this in words. We forget that we can be devoted to her, because we've been given this hierarchy that, like, okay, until 15 years ago, look, okay, LSD is at the top, psilocybin little behind here. Oh, now we got to put ayahuasca at the top because she's the master teacher. We have this hierarchical, categorical understanding of the plant teachers, when that is just not how it works. If we have a proper relationship to cannabis, in my humble experience, she can teach us and will teach us and heal us in different ways and modalities and aspects, but everything that every one of those other plant teachers can teach us, or at least have taught me. And that, of course, some have their specialties, and, there are kind of different powers within each one, if you have articulated in your book. But cannabis is not the weakest of the teacher plants, right? I mean, that's the other reason why people get in trouble, because they think like it's just no big deal, and they just blaze and they're on the couch for years, and then all of a sudden they freak out, or all of a sudden they've got this addictive relationship that is kind of like consuming their life. Where, like, that seems to me to speak to the power of ganja, right? Because that's the other thing, and maybe another way to answer your question is a little bit more diabolical, which is proper, but she has such a diabolical reputation that I sometimes, maybe I play it down too much. But the girl wants to proliferate, right? If you're just going to be a host for cannabis to kind of like use up some conscious bandwidth for a while and get distributed and remixed and bred together, and new combinations of her genome and whatnot, like, that's exquisite to her. She loves that. She got no problem with it. You know what I mean? It's like, if you're just smoking her for shits and grins, then she'll take all the shits and grins she can get. You know what I'm saying? Like, so there is this kind of like, she's got her own agenda, people. Okay, like, it's not like she's torturing you when she's putting you on the couch like that and then suddenly smacking you to wake up. But she does have compassion. And sometimes that slap, I'll even call it, comes with compassion, right? It's just like, hey, have you noticed how unbelievably powerful I am? And how if you'll just ask, you can experience, the inner light of God flowing through you, as the Rastafarians might point out.
I've experienced her as one of the most psychedelic plants there is. And she's
Exactly.
so often called the gateway, which is so insulting because she can open the door. She can also take you far beyond.
And
If
she's
you,
the narrow gate, as Jesus would put it, because not everybody figures out the way through her, right? They think they know what she is. She's the most misunderstood, as we've seen, right? She's the most scapegoated, the most reviled, the most raced. But she's all around us now. So this is such an unbelievable opportunity, right?
yeah,
Now with the wide variety of access that many people can get, and that they can learn about strain, they can learn about terpene profile and so forth. And not the last piece, the foundational piece to the practice is this cultivation of a very sacred relationship to the plant, where the sacred, as you remember, we can just use as shorthand to say, it doesn't mean religious. It doesn't even mean God is involved. It means it's involving opening up to domains beyond ordinary space and time. Outside, so the Sabbath, right, in some religions exists because you have this time outside of ordinary time, right? We can do that by making a circle within a space. We can do that by taking a moment out of a day, right? That is making it sacred. It doesn't mean that there's some particular institution or lineage that is coming along with that, making it sacred. However, whatever lineages we have, kind of in our spiritual genome, as it were, or our macro biome of spirituality, they're often beautiful tools for working with the plants, right? And if we feel a resistance to some aspect of our own spiritual path or spiritual journey, that's especially beautiful, right? Because, okay, what is that resistance? For me, that resistance was, for example, to the Bible, which, in many ways, Mama Waska and Cannabis taught me how to read. Because the Bible is articulating non-dual experiences where the boundary between the human and the divine momentarily dissolves, changes in kind, disappears, is forgotten, becomes dynamic, fluctuates, all kinds of differential relationships to that larger scale of awareness. And if you don't recognize and welcome those kinds of experiences into your life, and like most of us, you push them out and say, well, that's just weird. Like when coincidences happen to people, when synchronicities happen to people, many people are like, myself included, for many, many years, that's just, I'm going to pretend that didn't happen, because if that's true, everything is way too connected with each other in ways that make me feel like I just disappeared, right?
yeah, or out of control.
We can get better at that, right? And I really think cannabis is it's certainly one of the most promising medicines, but it's also a spiritual ally in, not coincidentally, a spiritual ally, in the tradition of what Buddhism calls, and much conventional Buddhism would decry this, but Buddhism talks about upaya, or skillful means, techniques for making spiritual progress. And that word skillful is important, right? Even though the word's probably untranslatable, it takes skill. You got to get good at it. Just like you can get better at washing a dish, right? You get better at making yourself clear, transparent, available, open in that space of listening you talked about at the very beginning.
Beautifully articulated. Let's take a couple questions
Yay.
from our fabulous audience. If you want to raise your Zoom hand or you can put a question in chat, and I'm happy to take a few. We're
And
going to do
questions are
this now,
precious.
and we'll do it towards the end too. But does anybody want to chime in with a question or a topic you'd like us to explore? We can keep yapping then. Well, all right.
This never happens in my classes, but then they know they're going to get graded, you know, so.
We did have one comment. This is
Oh,
fabulous. So we'll take that. Thanks, Brett. So there is a topic I'd love to explore. It's like, let's talk a little bit about the Nate. Oh, here.
I see
Tracy
something in the chat.
Tracy wants to ask, yeah, she's brought this up a couple of times. She wants to ask about the effects on the lungs, but let's talk about the fact that this is a plant that has some ramifications on a physical level. So how do we reconcile that? Like, not to mention she's addictive. We brought that in. And there are people that are concerned that here she is a healer slash somebody who can potentially harm us. Any
Well,
comments on
remember
that?
the answer from Paracelsus forward about what differentiates a poison from a remedy is dosage, right? And the lungs are particularly precious to me because as somebody who had severe asthma until 2002, I well recognize the possibilities there. So, cannabis is a proven bronchodilator, and delivered in the right way, in the right dosage, is very good for many lung ailments. Okay, but you know, I haven't seen any studies that differentiate microdosing from the usual macrodose. But in general, when I've worked with people in terms of their use of cannabis, and often people who had an addictive relationship to cannabis, it really was about like, whoa, less is more, right? Okay, that the amounts that people have as an idea now, you know, that they should be consuming is way out of whack with what you can cultivate as a very effective dose. And this has been found by many different investigators from many different traditions. However, I mean, it depends on what we're using it for, right? Like for chronic pain, sometimes large amounts of indica are called for, but that's where, you know, you probably are going to be working with some RSO oils or some other edible, in which case the lungs aren't even an issue, right? But I would say that if you are getting, we're getting lots of good questions. If you're getting lung issues from cannabis, it's because cannabis is pointing you to your lungs. And so you need to, dwindle the amount of cannabis that you're using, maybe shift to an oil or some people find that vape is less invasive on the lungs. I personally think that small amounts of flower smoked is a very beautiful tonic for the lungs, but it has to be small amounts. So that's my wrap on the lungs. The lungs are a long-term teacher. You got to cultivate pranayama, you know, yoga of breath. If you're being taught something about your lungs, you really need to practice, right? You find practices that have to do with things. So that's
yeah, it's like what we were saying about memory, etc. If something comes up physically, she's pointing to a greater problem. There's a message there, not to vilify her.
Yeah, and you know, all of the studies that I'm familiar with, and again, it's impossible to keep up with all of them, but many investigators were quite disappointed, it seemed, to find, because they were, for a long time, cannabis science was all about find out what's wrong with cannabis. Like literally, there is a lab at Penn State that's $60 million a year. They look for things wrong with cannabis. Okay. And they were surprised to find in the epidemiological studies that when they looked at long-term cannabis smokers, they did not find the kind of cancer or other disorders that you would find with tobacco use, for example.
Okay, So I want to address what Catherine's putting in chat. So she wants to talk about how best to let ganja teach her, but she brought in something really important, that we talk a lot about ganja as a trickster. And
Yes.
so she asked, what does this mean? And can we trust what marijuana shows us? It's such a great question.
Great question. Yes, she is a trickster. And she's a trickster, and I'll get to the mushroom question too, and microdose. She's a trickster for the same reason that other teachers in the crazy wisdom tradition are tricksters, because she's finding out what kind of presuppositions you're harboring and holding on to. And so you can trust her to tell you the truth, but you can't trust that you're going to understand the way in which what she's telling you is true. Okay. So therefore, if she's coming on as a trickster, you basically can't fall for any of it, including your own self, right? Like, in other words,
Especially.
yeah, the biggest hoax you've fallen for is your own story about yourself and who you are and what you need and how you've not anybody in particular, but all of us, how we're being victimized, how it's, and how it's not fair and so forth. That is what we have to learn how to gently let go of, and just have her teach us and say, okay, like, I'm listening. Do you have anything else to say? Right? If she comes out with a bunch of trickster kind of queries, and say like, okay, cool. I'm not understanding that. Can we keep going with one of these threads? And she'll dial to authentic inquiry. She will, but at first, a lot of times she's trying to see if you're serious. You know what I mean? Like, so.
And if you're attached to the story, rather than an experience of feeling, an experience versus something in the mind, she'll perpetuate that, of course.
Yes. And she, basically it's the same question again. She's mirroring back what we are, sort of worried about. So, a lot of these questions are, about negative side effects of the drug. So maybe I should go to this as a microdose here then.
Yeah. Well, and even your language, nanodosing. You just wrote an article in Plant Medicine People about nanodosing, which is not a term used frequently. So you've addressed this a little bit already, but talk about why a nanodosing, what that is, but that protocol is so advantageous with this plant spirit.
Yes. So first of all, when we take a big knot of bud and we use our thumb and we cram it into a bowl, and then we just burn it and take a big old whiff of it, that even if we say Shiva hum and we're pointing it out, we're not really in consideration of where we're going when we do that, right? So, and it becomes so automatic that it sometimes gets represented, like in film sequences of somebody, and like there's a kind of sequence where you're like doing a bong hit, doing something else, doing a bong hit, doing something else, and you get caught up in this thing. So microdose, first of all, means just pointing your attention to the fact that when you pack, you should pack half of what you think you need, and then pack half less again, right? And you should approach it and really kind of like behold it, look at it, get to maybe even hang out with that particular subset of a bud for like a day or two. I know it can dry out or something, but just like get to know it. And then you smoke it. So that's the microdose. I would say a microdose is something on the order of ending up with about 2.5 milligrams of THC, which would mean, again, I'm talking about in compound, but would be like the smallest one hitter that you can buy, pretty much half of a puff on one of those held for about 3 seconds. And you'll say, oh, I won't even feel it. And that's because you're not waiting 20 minutes, but it takes a while for it to unfold. And so that would be a macrodose done, like in diet formation, as you teach it, Kat, right? So that you can do 3 days on like that, 5 days on like that, and then off 2 days. There's a lot of different rhythms that you can work out, but you can avoid entirely ever building up a tolerance by keeping it that micro threshold and taking a break every now and again when she tells you to, essentially. Now, the nano dose is what I recommend starting with, just because whether you have a previous practice or not, if you have a previous practice, you walk away from it for a little while, just a little while, even just 2 days. I understand some people are in situations where it's fundamental for them as a medicine, so they need that medicine. You work it out in your own sense of dosage and so forth, but the mantra is less is more, right? Constantly less is more. You want to notice the breath at least as much as you notice the ganja, the fact of taking the breath. A lot of what you're doing, you're doing a pranayama, right? Right? So the more you realize that when you're taking a puff, you're already doing the yoga, right? The more it will become a yoga. So the nano dose means walk away. And then again, when you reapproach, like take it out, look at it. The teeniest of the teeny, right? Become intimate in some way that is meaningful to you. I mean, one of the benefits that comes from being in a context where you can grow it legally or relatively safely in your own context is that you enter into that relationship with the plant almost naturally, right? Almost like it's the condition of really properly taking care of the plant. And we do that, like, if you read like the writings of somebody like DJ Short, who was a relatively early cannabis breeder, there's a kind of intimacy that he cultivates with the plant, right? Where he's just taking his fingers and running them over the plant in the morning and smelling how it smells in the morning. And how does it smell at night, right? And a kind of really watching the plant and really even almost taking the plant as a meditative object. That's the nano dose, right? And then the gentlest of approach back, right? Of even just like half of what I just described on that tiniest of one hitters. Or you get a capsule that is they're readily available kind of capsules that are essentially cannabis butter inside the capsule that is measured out to have 5 milligrams. The best ones have 5 milligrams, I think, because they're easier to work with. And then you can take those apart and cut those up. If you cut it up once, it's 2.5. If you cut it up again, it's 1.25, and so on. So you can do a 0.625 or whatnot, just like that. And you let your mouth learn from that tiny amount of cannabis butter, where a lot of the interaction is happening anyway, actually, with that cannabis butter. And you really study up, right? You become like, you don't become a snob, but you become like a sommelier is with wine. You kind of like are having a regard for it. You become like a chef, right? And so when you start doing that, then the plant will teach you what's the right dosage, what should I do about my dreams and so forth. Does that make sense?
Makes beautiful sense. And the only thing I would add is it's also the way in that beautiful subtle dance where all of the plants like to try to remind us that what we're experiencing with them is a remembrance. It isn't about the dosage or what's in the cup or the hit. It's about consciousness. And when we do this in a subtle way, which can be very confronting to our beautiful minds that think it's go big or go home, when we do it in a subtle way, it's easier, I think, for us to realize it's a co-creation with the magic of the plant, that they're the key that's unlocking inside of us our relationship with the all. They're not the source of it. We have it too. It's just they don't forget, we do. And I know
That's
for
right.
myself, when I experiencing that in a subtle way, it's mind-blowing. It's like obvious, oh yes, this is in me too. Yeah. So many good questions. I want to address Adam's question. Do you, because we've kind of brought this in right now, but his question is, do you have suggestions for structured practices to try out with her beyond just sitting in silence, yoga, breath work, dance, and play? Although all of those things are awesome. But how else does she like to be incorporated into our lives? Can we bond with her?
Well, I like what is it Michael Green says, Glenn G says, all about set, setting, and dosage. If you manage all three, cannabis can be amazing. Of course, set and setting is that infinite domain of cultivation that we're talking about. And you're saying, do I have recommendations for kind of structured practice that goes along with cannabis? Now, this one is probably a little bit controversial, but I think properly used, cannabis and sitting meditation are beautiful partners, right? In other words, that on the one hand, for example, a sativa strain, even microdosed, can really lead the active mind to be hyperactive, right? And you can say, well, why would you ever do that if you were going to meditate and sit? And that most traditions, when you're meditating and sitting, it's a focused, it's various ways of using the attention to go beyond thought, right? To let the thoughts dissipate. But if you think about it, it's a little bit like running with weights, right? That you potentiate the hyperlogical, hyper-rational, hyperactive cognitive mind with a little bit of sativa, and then you go into a structured meditation practice that eventually builds up to at least 35 minutes a day. And when you do that, your mind learns how to let go of the jangly thought tangle that can emerge, right? And bramble that can emerge in a ganjified mind, right? And it sees it for what it is. It's just like, oh, those are just thoughts. I can let go of thoughts. So, as I said before, for me, fundamental to any structured practice with cannabis would be some form of sitting meditation. Chanting is easier, as it were, but also very beautiful with cannabis, because again, it's going to crowd out any of that chattering monkey mind. Because if you're chanting something, whatever language it's in, right? But like, I like to do Sanskrit chanting just because it's a beautiful poetics, and I don't know, the complexity of it makes my mind focus on it enough that I can't do anything else, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So chanting, meditation, physical practice. If you're microdosing, it's completely and very well complemented by whatever physical practice, whether it be yoga but I like biking and swimming along with yoga, that there will be a kind of way in which you can enter into the meditative state and observe the physical practice that is unfolding and let go of your expectations concerning that practice, or any striving, any need to make some particular goal. And by relaxing into that practice, you find, for example, that if you're a biker, you'll be faster. There'll be less effort. The most kind of specific answer I can give is that any practice which helps structure your attention inward, and your kind of mindful awareness of the body mind, B, and self-care, then those things go along very well with cannabis. That's, again, one of the reasons why cannabis is such a, for me, helpful teacher, because it's actually, she's actually teaching you how to take care of yourself, is what she's doing.
She's so somatic. Like, she was one of the medicines that helped me crack the code of my eating disorder. Because the most profound experience I've ever had of loving my body came from her, because it was an intention and it's just really beautiful to acknowledge that, to harness that. So thank you for all of those. Let's talk about a little bit more of the dream space. and her
Yes.
relationship with that. So I want to preface it. Brett shared something really interesting, that he was diagnosed with cannabis use disorder, laugh out loud, right? And his question is that when he stopped using her, took that time out, he started having incredibly horrible dreams, manifested
Yes.
within weeks, and they lasted for a long time. So his concern is essentially REM sleep in conjunction with her, the quality of sleep, CBD as well, blocking REM sleep. What do you have to say about her relationship with that world?
Um, I'm afraid I'm a broken record in the old analog style that like, I'm going to repeat what I said, that means she's pointing to the dream space, that you have some work to do there. So for example, it's very important, I think, to shift, not to forget the scientific model of what's going on here, but to have humility about what we really know in the scientific model about, REM sleep, all these sleep states and so forth. Because I'll just tell you like how I learned about this, that when I went to Costa Rica, maybe, I don't know, 20 years ago or something, and then therefore force majeure, as the lawyers say, I suddenly had to quit cannabis because I was traveling with my young kids and there was no opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. And oh boy, was within lickety split. First of all, I thought there weren't any physical withdrawal symptoms. I had very serious physical withdrawal symptoms and passed out actually twice. And I did not have a heavy habit, so I'm no doubt a sensitive to it in some ways. But as the poster is pointing out, the dream space was absolutely hell. I was visited by Dick Cheney at the time, who was backing up a cosmic starship to Earth and sucking all the life force out of it while he chomped on a cigar, right?
That
But
wasn't a dream.
I know exactly, perfect cue, that what's happening there is you're being kind of plunged into the space of what the wonderful psychologist James Hillman calls the imaginal, at least that's how I pronounce it, the imaginal, that the dream space takes on a kind of a reality, a flavor of reality that the ordinary dream space usually does not. There's a kind of intensity and kind of urgency to the information of the dream. And so in a way, that's one of her teachings. She's like, you want me to teach you how to navigate the dream space? I'll give you the dream space. Here's the dream space, right? So we have to begin to work directly with that imaginal realm, and that's the realm of shamanism. That's the realm of gnosis. They're not so much bad dreams if we observe them, as they are too. I mean, I don't want to tell anybody else what their dreams are, but I think if we pause and look and see what happens in them, which is hard to do, but if we pause, it's more like they're too much, they're too real, right? Now, I would say that with a microdose practice, I find no effect. There are a lot of other variables here, but I find no effect on my dream life, and like when I am doing it or when I stop, right? I don't find the sudden launch into the dream world. And I think that's because, knock wood and speaking humbly, is that I've just gotten a little bit better and more comfortable in navigating the imaginal space itself, right? So for example, one of the things I counseled somebody the other day who was having really difficult dreams. It's imaginal. I like imaginal. Is two things. One, before you go to sleep, tell yourself that just before you want to wake up, you want to ask the question, where is the dreamer? This is from Robert Adams, the great Advaita teacher. And it sounds like nothing, but you got to do it every night. And then eventually, before you wake up, it's like the garage door closing on a garage, and you see the light leaking through, you're like, oh, that's what the dreamless dream space was like, right? And it's a very beautiful space. So you do that, and but B, remind yourself, teach yourself, tell yourself, if you're a meditator, for example, tell yourself that, hey, I can meditate in my dreams too. I can chant in my dreams, for example. So then, like, this isn't that you don't have to engage in full-blown lucid dreaming, because then just what happens is you start meditating sometimes in your dreams, because that's what you're doing in your quote ordinary life too, your waking life. And so you start meditating, or engaging in other practices within the dreams, and those help you navigate that imaginal domain. And so, for example, a lot of people think about it. A lot of people get even like very, very disturbed or freaked out, would be their language, by some experiences reading some fiction books, right? Just reading, right? And that's like training and being in the imaginal space so that you can both be immersed in it, but also not subject to it, right? As like, Aurobindo, I think it was, the great guru teacher, said it was about being in the world, but not of it. You similarly can learn to be in the dream, but not of it, if that makes sense. And of course, and then you're not. And then you have, a difficult journey in the dream space, and it's teaching you something. It's teaching you something.
There's a theme here around teaching the lung issues, the dream space. It's
She's
like
always
an
like,
invitation.
hey, kapow in your eye.
Yeah. Okay, beautiful. So there's a question that Randy asked that I really love. I wanted to bring this in. So he asked about speaking to the aspect of cannabis and how she assists in the integration process after other plant medicine ceremonies like ayahuasca, wachuma, etc. So I think it's just to kind of tease into this conversation. It's that piece I mentioned. She's so somatic. She's got such a strong relationship with the body. And for me, integration, it begins and ends with the body. Like we have the term embodied. Like if we don't embody the amazing lessons that come in from the cosmic journeys with mamawaska and whatnot, then it becomes this experience that we just sort of put on the back burner of like, yeah, I remember when I met God and traveled through, the multiverse, but it's not.
Remember Jupiter?
Yeah, right. But it's not here. It's not impacting our conscious daily lives. So what role, do you see cannabis playing in that integration?
Yes. Well, it's a great question. Thank you for it. They're all really fascinating. I'm loving them. I'm going to have to go back and look at the chat because I know I've missed some of them. But as I said in my own experience, like that's a question for the other teacher plant as well. In other words, that Mama's teaching to me was that I was now free of my cannabis habit, and that from heretofore I was going to, that every use of cannabis that I would encounter would be shamanic. And literally the very next day, I forgot about this because it was my habit to have just a little bit before I gave a talk. And I was giving a talk to a bunch of amazing curanderos. And that was when I turned into a bird. I was like, oh my God, the girl wasn't joking, right? So for me, it meant a long period of kind of ganja chastity, like I had to become pure. She cut me off for a while, you know what I mean? She was like, no, like, we're not going to be seeing each other for a while, like I may never be back, in fact. Now, that said, that was my own particular journey, and I had already cultivated a kind of addictive relationship to her. So I needed 7 years to come back, right? And to really come to her fresh with intention the next time, right? Remember, who's going to smoke this? Who's going to smoke this?
Yeah.
And that said, I feel like one of the reasons I've been able to continue to integrate beautiful experiences that I had with Mama and mushrooms and other plant allies and teachers is through cannabis, is that I don't have to then go and eat 2 grams of mushrooms, say, in order to visit a particular state of consciousness. I've already been there. And by coming humbly to cannabis and being mindful, I am taught how to work through a lot of the things that I downloaded all in one night, sometimes 26 years ago. Yeah, right? So those are all still there. It's like some kind of Bohmian, David Bohm, the implicate order. All of the things that we learned from the plants all at once are all there. And then with cannabis, we can make a kind of gentle approach that is integral into everyday life in a way that at least I don't find, like, I really need to work hard and build infrastructure to do other kinds of journeys, right? Given the life that universe has, entangled me in, as it were, and that I've woven for myself. But cannabis is the teacher that keeps on teaching, right? Like, there's no antipathy. Like, for a while I thought that Mama Waska was jealous of cannabis, and that's like, yeah, I know, it was my silliness. I was just like,
it's a common thing. People ask that a lot. Are they
know.
jealous of each other? Like, I think we
Right.
personify the plants a lot in that way. We put our own sort of shadowy projections, because there's energy that could be described as competitive sometimes, but it's only because they want our full attention when we're working with one at a time. And
Yes.
and it's just a sign of respect, not because they're jealous of each other. That's my interpretation of that energy.
And I honestly, and I'd be interested to hear what you think here, is that I think what's so interesting, as we've helpfully gone decrim, and it's cool to do psychedelics again, right? As everybody says it's okay, right? For some of us, that I think we're kind of like, cannabis is back at the party saying, hello, like, what about me? Like, everybody's like, I need to learn about psilocybin and depression, or I need to find an ayahuasca ceremony. Beautiful. I love both of those things. But, like, have you considered the fact that cannabis is an ancient teacher plant with, like, wisdoms ready for you right over here that you can do on your own? And then, like, maybe after doing a lot of work with her, you might get a lot more out of those other teacher plants, right? That are, like, harder to, they're more difficult for a lot of people to come by and to interact with meaningfully and so forth. Whereas cannabis, all we need to do is dial it down, come with respect, and pair it with these other practices. And she's the most brilliant and loving and wise plant teacher you could possibly, she's the guru you didn't know you already had.
I think that kind of plays into maybe the greater logic of why she's the one that's blazed a trail in mass consciousness in terms of becoming accepted. Everything else is following her lead, and we could say a lot about the pros and cons of that, and what she's taught us about our relationship with her by the cannabis industry and what's happened there. But yeah, just to your point of realizing or recognizing that she's kind of been there all along. It's like the rom-coms where you realize you were always in love with your best friend. Like, that's the one that you want. And
It's
she's like,
you, Lady Ganja.
she's like, hey, I'm right here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, there's so much to say about this, but a little bit about the cannabis industry. And all of the, like, Solomon's asking about the Delta offshoots and all of the things, not to mention the commercialization, the fact that it's hard to get cannabis that is truly organically cultivated by someone who loved her. Like, just in general, what is the whole industry teaching us?
Well, first thing the whole industry is teaching us is that they're preventing, in a lot of states, the widespread availability for the legal growing of it ourselves, right? So I have many friends and very good friends, lovely people that I love who work in the cannabis industry. And I have a lot of respect for a lot of what the cannabis industry has done to help, manifest the infrastructure for allowing us to all have access to this medicine, that's what it says it is, and, is mindful of strain and lineage and terpene and all these other aspects. And the fact that, praise Jah, we're not all still getting incarcerated. Now, that's why I said all of us, right? Like that. I know that on the police blotter in my small town, we're a medical state and a medical town with 3 dispensaries. People are still regularly being arrested for quote unquote marijuana all the time. So we can't forget that, like, as we're being told how important it is to rush out to our nearest dispensary and get certified and so forth, we can't forget that this is coming along at the same time that this police state is still crunching along, right? But we'll get over that. I also think, so that's first and foremost. I think that, if we follow the money, and I don't begrudge anybody the money, but we have to point out the competing interests, right? If you have a proprietary interest in cannabis only being available through certain licensed dispensaries and so forth, and you forbid the cultivation of it by, interested participants, then you are creating a monopoly on, and you're being a carpetbagger, essentially. You're coming along and trying to steal economic value out of people's need for this medicine and preventing and putting a barrier between them and the medicine. So I think that just has to be the next gentle reminder, saying, okay, thank you for all this, but by the way, can I get some seeds and grow them at my house without worrying, and grow them outside and learn how to take care of them from other people? Because it's not easy. Skillful means it's a beautiful craft. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is, it's not possible for me to keep up with everything that is happening in the cannabis industry. And all that I can do is observe, like, what I see in, say, like San Francisco, my own town of State College, Pennsylvania, what I've seen in DC, what I've seen in Vegas, in all these different, in Illinois, all these,
Denver.
Denver. I haven't seen it there though. So I haven't myself. Oh, wait a minute. No, I haven't. And what I find striking is the absence of this, what we're doing right now. In other words, that, and I don't think there's I mean, there's of course some ill intent here and there, and and plenty greed, but I think it's mostly inadvertent, like, treatment of cannabis as a product that, like, has certain brand characteristics and profiles, that does what, like, the philosophers like to call it, reifies it, turns it into a thing. And when we turn it into a thing, we are like, okay, medicine, heal me, get me high, or, subject object again, right? As opposed to, oh, like it's kind of interesting that we don't get to see the plants, right? That, like, the buds are, put into these containers, and we're not allowed to see the plants growing as plants. We don't get to be around the plants as plants. It's just a thing, nothing to pay attention to here. Just crush it up in the, and vape it, or, better yet, buy one of these value added, treatments of it that we have, that we can usually charge you more for per, amount. So again, that might sound critical. I don't mean it critical in a negative sense, but I think that if we're going to get the most out of this medicine, we have to give thanks that there is such a thing as the cannabis industry where people are not getting arrested. Also recognize the lineage of all the people that have come before who were arrested, who were incarcerated, who were suppressed for the cultivation of this plant wisdom, right? And who were the pioneers in figuring out how to, who brought the seeds from Afghanistan to bring the indica genes to California and to start growing some of that indica indoors when we're flying helicopters in Northern California. This has been a long, slow struggle that's just being erased, right? Obviously, like, it depends on the state, but in some states, the very people who were participating in the incarceration and the hystericizing cannabis and cannabis users, and are the people now who are in a position to make more money selling it than they can by putting people in jail, right? Yeah. So that's, if you want to read a novel, I've got my Philip K. Dick shirt on today because he was a great student of ganja. And his book, A Scanner Darkly, is a really beautiful novel about that, way in which the kind of drug war complex criminalizes and then sells it back to you, right? But, but I do think that there's space where we should all also just pause and give thanks and say, like, wow, there really are a lot of very beautiful people out there doing beautiful healing work in the cannabis industry. Just as there are in the education complex that I am a part of, that is, ought not, judge other modes of business in certain ways as it becomes a business, right? But that we do need to know that it ought to be a fundamental right for us to grow our own medicine, full stop.
One of the things that I love to do in this context with the relationship with the plant, especially cannabis, coca, plants that have been tremendously vilified in this way, is to also go to them with the willingness to help feel and process what they have gone through.
Yes.
We talk about, I was incarcerated this year, and I appreciate the love and support of the tribe around what I went through, but it also made me even more profoundly, in a spiritual sense, aware of what the plants carry because of being vilified, even by the well-intentioned members of the tribe who love them, and we blame them for a bad trip or whatever, that they're carrying this projection energy, especially from the system that you mentioned that vilified them and now profits off them without treating them as sentient beings. So, they carry a tremendous amount. And every time we go intentionally with that honoring energy to them, willing to feel and alchemize that, like, we lighten their load too. Mm-hmm. So it's a beautiful act of reciprocity. Sometimes people ask me that, what can I do to give back? I can't grow. I can't put ayahuasca in my yard or whatever. It's like, ask them what they need first and foremost, but be willing to alchemize some of this for them. It's like it's a intimate bonding experience.
I think that's really beautiful. And a lot of times when I ask that, I'm reminded of, like, hey, remember the ancestors, meaning remember all the people that brought all of this wisdom on up into the present. Remember the widespread incarceration. None of them are victims. Don't treat them as victims, but honor where all this wisdom is coming from. And don't think it's just some kind of like, oh my gosh, now we understand cannabis. It's like, yeah, there have been doctors of this plant for thousands of years, and they're taught directly by the plant. And so let's give thanks and reverence where it's due,
Aho. Couple more questions in chat that we'll get to, but before we do, I just want to let everybody know that Mo is a part of the Plant Medicine People tribe, and part of his passion is essentially, call you a cannabis coach, is helping people one-on-one, cultivating these kinds of, like, relationships that we're talking about today, but also in a really personal way. I mean, I really hope the whole notion of a cannabis coach starts to blow up more, because she is so readily available in our daily lives and has been the one to blaze a trail in a legal sense, but she's also incredibly complicated, as all of these questions are pointing to. And it's helpful to have somebody who understands a bit about her essence and can help us craft a relationship that's based on that space of awareness, illumination, rather than getting tricked, by our own selves, our own minds. So people asking, how can we continue this conversation? You can reach out to Mobius via plantmedicinepeople.com. You can ask him a question, or get a session booked, because he's our resident expert, in quotes, on Lady
Yes.
Ganja. So, and if we don't get to your question, please, reach out to, we'll do this again, because she's a very popular topic, which is awesome. But I just wanted to make sure people were aware you were available for such things.
Well, and the thing that the coach always tells you is to show up for practice, right? So I like that coach moniker more than I might have expected, because it, like, the reason I'm interested in doing this is because I have found that working one-on-one with people on meditation practice, it's very similar, in the sense that, like, I myself was lucky enough to have many different teachers, in meditation and other spiritual practices. And like, those teachers enabled me to, like, let go of bad practices and discover better ones, if that makes sense. It was all, I had to do it all, but there's a way in which, if somebody is on the path and has, and kind of rather more well seasoned in certain ways, or just have had experiences that you haven't, then I always found I got nonlinear results out of it. That, like, even a little bit of an interaction with somebody, I got a lot out of it. So that's why I'm interested. And I think it's where so much of the value of this medicine really resides. Like, it's like, okay, everybody can have cannabis in these states where you're not going to immediately get jailed for it. But it's like, yes, okay, now what do I do with this? Right? Like, I knew what to do with it before, because I knew what I had to hide. Right? Like, I had to be parsimonious with it. I couldn't let anybody know that I was using it. Right? All these things of closeting that habit, and then suddenly no longer necessary to closet it, as it were, to borrow an analogy. We can take the opportunity to come fresh to it shamanically, essentially, and just come fresh and say, okay, wow. Okay, now that we've got the stupidity out of the way of jailing people for it, let's really begin to learn from this plant, and let's really begin to heal, because it's time to heal, right? Like, it's not a headline because it's the headline behind every headline. It's time to heal, and we have everything we need to have access to heal, but we have to do it ourselves from the inside out, together.
That feels like a really beautiful place to bookend our talk today. It is time. And
Beautifulness.
great, big, huge, heartfelt thank you to everyone who showed up for this conversation, for the very thoughtful questions. And big, huge thank you to Cannabis and
Yes,
her
thank her.
role in our culture, Lady Ganja. And a big, huge thank you to you, Mo. Thank you for
Oh, you're welcome. It was so much fun.
your wisdom, your language, your big, beautiful brain, and bigger, even more beautiful heart are so
Thank you for seeing
palpable.
it.
I love you. Yeah, see everybody at our
Love
next
back at you.
webinar.
I
Yeah,
hope I connect with everybody that has any interest. Just, hit me up through the website, send an email, whatever. I'll respond as quickly as I can.
just go to coaches on plantmedicinepeople.com and Mo is there. And so big love, everybody. Be safe out there.
Thank you
See you
so
next time.
much.
Bye.
Bye.